Another week, another job. So if you'd watched my latest video, I was relining a pond that was at the bottom of somebody's garden. It was very shallow, it was very overgrown with yellow flag iris, and the pond was quite overgrown with trees and shrubs. And I mentioned that that was quite a typical pond that I would regularly see and work on. And I suspect that this is probably the other typical style of pond that I would do lots of work on. And this one is predominantly a fish pond, a koi pond, rather than just an ornamental pond or a wildlife pond. It's a pre-formed fiberglass pond, and the glass fibre over the years has given up the ghost. Again, the pond is leaking, so this job it's going to be relining this one. This is interesting though, because there's a lot of very big fish in here, and there are two very large sturgeon, which I'm quite keen to see what they look like. So this is the pond, and we've got a few mixed species in here, some koi, some grass carp, and as I say, two very large sturgeon lurking somewhere in the bottom. I mean, that albino grass carp has got to be 30 inches plus nose to tip, and that one's probably going to be a bugger to catch because they're quite prone to jumping. Now, in relining this pond, I've got to set up a couple of big holding tanks for the fish and to hold as much of this pond water as possible, get the pond emptied out, hook out the fish, rig up the old filtration system and get that set up in the holding tank as well, so that the fish are going to be self-contained and they can then remain in that tank for as long as the job takes. And then once that's done, all of the coping stone around the edges, the bottom section of that cascade, that's all going to have to be lifted and removed so that we can then get a fleece and a pond liner inside this shell, up over the edge, and then replace everything and put it back as it was. Now, fiberglass ponds, I mean, you can patch and repair fiberglass. This has been repaired in the past, and it's a very old shell. Again, it's sort of come to the end of its life, 30 years plus. One could remove the fiberglass pond and get down to bare earth and then potentially line that. But when you're dealing with fiberglass or preformed ponds like this, there's often a lot of loose spoil which has gone round as a backfill. And the risk of removing that pond is then that you haven't got any strong shelves or structure that you can then line without then digging out and going larger or putting some blockwork structure back into the excavation. So the best thing here is to simply put a pond liner inside the old preformed shell, which is going to give the shape and the structure to line. We're also going to be upgrading the filtration system. This has got quite a small Laguna pressurised filter system with a 25 watt UV, and that's going to be replaced with a much larger Awaza filter clear with a 60 watt UV, so a huge upgrade. I think a lot of the fish in here are a tad on the big side for a pond of this size and volume, but they've all grown up from a very small size, and my customer Dave is quite fond of the fish, so I know he'd like to keep them. So relining the pond, making sure it holds its water and providing the best filtration system we can for something like this, it's going to be a big upgrade. Weather's manky, it's going to rain this week, so first thing I've done is set up my trusty bivvy, and then I'm going to rig up my holding tank over here. So this is going to be the holding tank for the fish, just a simple framed kids paddling pool. It's by far the easiest, most readily available and kind of cheapest way of holding quite large volumes of water. This is a small 10-foot diameter one, holds about 1,200 gallons, and it cost 85 quid. So a very simple thing to do, almost disposable. I mean, I've got another one which I've used for quite a few years, and really it's starting to get a little bit brittle, so I thought I would treat myself to a new one. Now, being brand new, there's going to be a bit of a residue on the lining, on the plastic film, which won't be ideal for livestock, so I'll give it a bit of a rinse before we then put the pond water in. So it's time to start thinking about hooking the fish out. We'll get this pond partially dropped, get all the water in the holding tank, and then when we get down to about the last foot or so, that's when I'll start to transfer the fish. In the meantime, I'm crossing my fingers that that grass carp doesn't decide to jump out part way through. Apart from a bit of a splash, I've not actually still seen the sturgeon yet. It's amazing to think they're in there, isn't it? Two of them.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. There's the tail of one. Okay, so I'm getting an idea of the size. I don't think you were exaggerating, were you?
No. I used to say fish only grow to the size of the pond.
Yeah, I know, that old wives' tale. So I've just caught sight of the first sturgeon, and they are big. Wide across the head and the pectoral fins. No way I'm going to try and attempt to catch that in a net, it's just going to get tangled up, so that's definitely going to be me in there with a blanket, picking him up and removing him. Probably the second biggest sturgeon I've ever handled. At the moment the fish are remaining nice and calm. I half expected the grass carp already to have started to thrash around and jump, and he hasn't yet. So a bit more water and then we'll start hooking out the fish. So if this grass carp decides to leap out and get me in the wrong place, that's going to hurt. Look at the back on that sturgeon, that is enormous. That's bigger than 4 feet, I think. That's a nice female. Just a minute, sturgeon. Come on, goldfish, out you get. Now, although it looks a little bit distressing seeing the fish floundering around like this, it's much better for them to be in shallow water. Just want to get a feel for what the base of the pond's like. You say it's sat on sand, that's good.
Yeah, it is.
We'll get a proper measure of that later, but that is a lovely big fish. Bloody hell, that is absolutely enormous. I am astonished that they've grown this big in here. I'd say that's longer than 4 feet, that big one. So this is proper true river monster style catching. And we'll get it in here.
Well, a couple of nice fish.
Yeah, absolutely. Come on, you. That is not easy. Oh. That's a big fish. I think this one's a fraction smaller. Maybe not. Well, that certainly got my heart racing. They behaved themselves. Next job, we'll just get the rest of this water out and then I can start to measure up for the pond lining. Do you mind if I stick you on the camera and introduce you?
Nah, go on.
Okay. You're talking a lot in the background, it'd be nice to see you. This is Dave, this is who owns the pond, and he's given me some interesting history on the pond. I think he's enjoyed watching the fish come out. So when was the last time the sturgeon have ever been out of the pond?
Possibly 7 years ago.
Okay.
The last one to come out actually jumped out, and it was on the slate there.
What's one of the sturgeon?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was warm, it was summertime.
Mm-hmm.
The sun had been on it for quite a while, because I was down the garden. Luckily, I came up the steps to come up the garden. What the day is this? And yeah, one was laying on there, and where he'd been moving and that, he made a right little trough in the slate.
Yeah.
His back was quite crinkly.
Yeah, they get covered in dust and dirt and muck as well, don't they? Which dries them out.
And I thought, well, he's got to be gone, sort of thing. But no.
It's amazing how long they can survive out of water for.
Yeah. I think their worst enemy is lack of air.
Lack of oxygen and blanket weed. Because they can't swim backwards,
Yeah.
they get tangled up in densely planted ponds. I mean, this is ideal for sturgeon because actually all they want really is a glorified fish tank. They just want a great big tank that they can swim around in.
Yeah.
And they don't want stuff which is going to be fibrous and they can get tangled up in. They're quite spiky, spiny. They get their pectoral fins trapped up in all that and then they get stuck. And as you say, because they're not swimming, they're not getting, a bit like sharks, they're not getting the water through their gills. They suffocate, lack of oxygen.
But I know, what was it, 3-4 years ago, we had power cut, and it was when the wife was first taken rough. So I came down here after a while and, oh no, they'd turned turtle and I was laying down the bottom now. And it was a very cold night. It was getting dark. So I got hold of them both and I'm leaning over there, dragging them back and forwards. Must have been about an hour to get them moving.
Yeah.
But even then they were a little bit sluggish sort of thing.
Yeah.
But no, they came to, and that's what's going now. 2 big sturgeons.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that, you know, they continue to thrive through the stress of this. But they came out pretty nicely there.
Well.
There wasn't not really any thrashing, was there, or any jumping? Very nice.
I'm awake many a night wondering about it.
Yeah. About this job?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's have a proper look at them. That's one of the big boys. No, they're going to be quite happy in here. We'll get the pump and the filtration running shortly. I'll just empty the pond first. Such a miserable day. Listen to the rain falling on this bivvy. It's like camping, just without the beer. Well, the fish are all looking happy in their holding tank. Put a little tarp over here last night just to provide a bit of shelter and a bit of shade as well for the fish. My main concern being the grass carp, which, as I said, we're really prone to jumping and leaping, so having a little bit of shade and a bit of cover is just going to help them to settle down in the tank. Obviously, the sooner we can get them back out into the pond, the better. In the meantime, I'm now starting to grind out the joints around the pond so I can lift all of the coping stones. It's a messy job, not one I'm particularly fond of. I'd normally like to use a bigger grinder with a water attachment and not create any dust, but it's a little bit too big for this, and some of the curves and sweeps, so a smaller grinder is required here. So mask up, bit of protective eyewear, and protect my ears. That's not a good start, is it? Panic over. Power had been switched off in the garage. So we are live and up and running. Looking good. So that's finally the bulk of the water done. Not greatest of jobs, but had to be finished. I've still got a bit of cleaning up to do, lots of silicone stuck on the edge of the fiberglass pond that I'll need to scrape away, but for the time being I want to focus my attentions now on this old Rockways cascade. I'm hoping it won't be too difficult to lift. It looks like it's got expanding foam that it's sitting on. Sounds pretty hollow under here, and then just a light layer of mortar over the top. So I shall carefully sort of cut away here and see if I can lift this. Rockways units were really popular in the 90s and sort of early 2000s. Sadly they're not made anymore, but they look quite nice as a pre-formed cascade. The concrete weathered nicely, you could get moss and algae and lichen and bits and pieces growing on it with age, and once you have plants and rocks and stuff around the edge it actually looked quite natural. So it might be quite nice to resurrect this and get this running as a feature again in the future. Go. I'll tell you what, when I was a kid and I used to sell these in the water gardens, they felt an awful lot heavier. Fantastic. Well, I think I'll just leave this propped up here out of the way. A little bit of edging stone still to remove, and then when we get to the stage of lining the pond liner can flop over here, be securely held in place, and then the cascade put back in. Wonderful. So it's a new day, pond liner's arrived, got my pond fleece, got some sand and cement and building materials. So the next stage of the job is going to be for me to re-drain this back down again, holding all of the water in some separate holding tanks. Give the shell a final clean out, get the pond fleece in, get the pond liner in, and get it refilled again to make sure that the liner fills the contours nice and neatly. It's a beautiful day, nice and hot and sunny already. Got my sun cream on, and I got a cup of tea, so I'm raring to go. Right, finally I'm in a position to start emptying out that pond. Took me an awful lot longer than I expected to have to clean away some of the silicone that was still attached to the fiberglass pond. That was a real pain. But we'll get this emptied out, we'll get it cleaned out, and we'll start the lining process. So that's the pond emptied out, and all of the sludgy water removed. And as I say now, it's a case of sticking the pond fleece in and the pond liner. Time is of the essence. I'm not comfortable leaving fiberglass shells like this empty for too long, because it's very easy for the water to collect behind the shell and for the pond to start to lift, and that's going to give me endless amounts of headaches if that happens. I also would wish it wasn't quite as windy as it is today, because doing pond fleece, especially when you're on your own and it's windy, again, it's a bit of a ball ache. You get the fleece looking nice and neat, and then a gust of wind lifts it up, and all your hard work is to no avail. Now it's really important that you use a fleece, and you might be forgiven to think that you could just drop a pond liner in here and that the fiberglass shell itself acts as a protective layer. And although the shell, the structure of this has a lot of structural strength, a lot of integrity, there's no give, there's no movement. So if there's a little bit of grit or gravel caught between the pond liner and the fiberglass shell, it'll be worse than if you were just lining an earth excavation and not using pond fleece. The only way it's going to go is piercing the pond liner. So pond fleece, very important. This is, as I always like to use, a heavy duty 250 GSM pond fleece. And I think the pond fleece is as important as the pond lining. Right, I think 2 or 3 strips of this will be sufficient. I'll spend a little bit of time just trying to make sure that any big folds and creases are neatly done, because I don't want that to transfer through to the pond liner. And then we'll get the pond lining put in as well. Pond liner next. Be careful with this. Now again, this stuff it's pretty heavy. 1 mil heavy duty liner. It's got a lot of bulk to it. And actually, if it wasn't for the big sturgeon, I probably would have been quite happy to use the more generic off the shelf 0.75 mil. I think the compromise with this is having a thicker liner and a more durable liner. It also means it's going to have slightly more creases than you'd get with a thinner, more flexible pond liner. But it's just not worth risking with those big fish. And the primary concern here is just getting this pond holding water reliably, because it was leaking. And you might wonder why we're using pond liner and not re-fiberglassing the pond, and that is an option. I probably wouldn't want to be fiberglassing this shell, as it's so old and it's had so many patches and repairs. And in that case, it will probably be worth lifting the shell out, screeding, concreting, and then fiberglassing over the top of that. But for this particular job, it was a lot more expensive. And again, primary concern is just making sure that this pond holds water. So pond liner is the easiest and cheapest in this instance way of doing so. Now I've pre-unrolled this on the grass just to make sure that it had been rolled up on the longest point. This is 5.49 or 5.5 meters by 4.2 something. And although normally it's rolled up along its longest length, it's not always the case. Sometimes it might have been cut off of a roll of a different width and then rolled up, and you don't realise until you got it into the shell, and then it's a bit of a pig to roll it all up and reorientate it. So far the fleece is behaving itself and hasn't actually budged in the wind. That's always a bonus. Now I'm just going to loosely open this up. I'm not going to try and get it to fit the excavation too neatly dry. I just want to focus on the base of the pond first of all, and making sure that I get the folds. Being basically rectangular, we'll end up with just 4 big sort of pleats in the corners, or gathers, and then there'll be a few little sort of ripples here and there. But I'll focus on the base of the pond first, get a bit of water in here to hold it down, and then start to work on these neat folds and work my way up. So as always, this will be easier with another pair of hands, but that's the pond liner basically in. And what I've been focusing on is making sure that all of the fold lines are in line with each other and nice and square to the pond. So we've got the main kind of vertical fold lines running along here, and then making sure that the fold lines on the width of the pond are also nice and straight and not off at a funny angle. It's not touching fully the floor in the corners, and it's opened fully on the base. I've made sure that we've got kind of equal overlap all the way around the pond, because as we start to get some water in here, the pond liner is going to start to get pulled into the excavation. And if you haven't got if you haven't got even overlap, then you might find that you get an area where suddenly your pond line is short, and then you're going to have to empty the pond, jiggle the pond liner around a bit and do it again. And I think that's going to be about okay. Let's get a little bit of water in here, and then we can start to make the folds.